Greetings, my friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Let's Get Gritty podcast with Dr. India White. I'm so thrilled to be here with you this holiday season. I wish all of you a wonderful closing of the school year for those that are principals, superintendents, teachers, and students that are watching this podcast with me today. Please be safe travels, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful holiday season and that you come back refreshed with lots of grit, ready to hit the ground running. So, with that said, I'm now going to first make some announcements for you. First off, the Let's Get Gritty podcast will be featured on Swain Girl Media channel. So, please tune in there to watch it on Fire Stick. And of course, I want to always give you an opportunity to follow me as well on social media platforms, whether that's Facebook, which is Miss India White, LinkedIn is The India White, Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach, Instagram is Indie238, YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. That's DR, doctor. Okay. Also, I wanted to remind you guys to please check out my website whenever you get a chance at www.india-white.com for blogs, books, and to schedule me for your next speaking event. If you need some coaching opportunities, whether you're a turnaround principal, you're trying to close the achievement gap, you need some professional development ideas for next year, I am here for you. Okay. So make sure you either send me a DM or an email. You can email me at india.white.123 at gmail.com. So I wanted to come on today and I wanted to kind of elaborate on the blog that I recently wrote for you guys with all that TLC because I figured, you know what? It's the end of the school year and I know what time it is. It's time for you to wrap up the school year, the first half of the school year and to start planning for the next year. But I know that in the midst of this, you've got teachers are finishing up assessments, assignments, grading papers, finalizing grades. Students are finalizing grades. There's lots of anxiety. There's a lot going on. And so even though I put a blog out there, I know many of you probably were like, thanks so much, but I got to get to these 100 assignments. And so because of that, I said, I'm going to do my best to break down some of the content in that blog for you, so that as you're riding home from work or you are sipping on a cup of tea or coffee or hot chocolate in this season, then you'll be able to kind of really rehash a lot of the things that we talked about in the blog. So, again, the topic of the blog was 8 tips for cultivating grit in underserved students. Again, 8 tips for cultivating grit in underserved students. I figured since this is the end of the 9 weeks for many people, this is imperative that we do our best to cultivate grit before we close that book on this quarter and lead into the next quarter. With some students maybe not getting, that grade that they could have gotten because maybe their grit was not um, as high as it usually is, or maybe they just weren't given opportunities to make up those assignments and things like that. So how can we, check our progress and check how we're really supporting and advocating for students and creating a sense of agency and support for all learners? So I felt that if we can talk about cultivating grit, this will help us out. So first things first, when I wrote the blog for you guys, the first tip we spoke about was setting high expectations. And it was really cool because when I talked about setting high expectations, a part of setting high expectations is to definitely provide clarity for your students. Sometimes students don't know exactly what you're expecting from them, whether that's an assignment, a project, an assessment. Sometimes they need you to write out those instructions again, or they need you to provide more clarity. It was really cool. I had a article that I did list in here where they highlighted Dr. John Hattie's work. And so with that said, I'm going to share this right now and share my screen so that you guys can see this. So right here it says, Hattie says teacher clarity is one of the top learning interventions. Here is how it works. So this is pretty cool. If you look down, it talks about in every case, the student is describing the task, not the learning. So what if instead we heard the following answers? I'm learning to solve two-step math problems. I'm learning how figurative language influences the plot. Or I'm learning about dark matter and why it's important. So they're just talking about different topics here and how instead of stressing out on, are you really, understanding my instructions, ask the students to explain exactly what they are doing. So it talks about how the difference between the first set of answers and the second set is that students are clear about the purpose of their learning, not so much just, oh, I'm in the class and I'm finishing this assignment. Like there's a specific purpose that they're highlighting. It talks about how this is a critical difference, according to John Hattie, whose meta research has found that teacher clarity is one of the most important learning um, interventions, available to us. So here is his teacher clarity scale here, and it shows that there is um, the findings there that contributes. So this is one of the higher findings of contributing to student success when they have that teacher clarity. Um, Go down a little bit more, and it talks about more about teacher clarity. There's a book right here, Clarity for Learning. If you want to check that out, you can check that out. And then this is by, it also talks about with the forward written by John Hattie. This book aligns with professional learning that they facilitated. Now, I want to go a little bit into the five essential practices here that were highlighted. It talks about how the author suggested five practices that, if used consistently and accurately, will result in greater teacher clarity and the ability of students over time to self manage their learning. So, over time, your students will self manage their learning. And so, those practices are crafting learning intentions and success criteria, co-constructing learning intentions and success criteria with learners, creating opportunities for your students to respond, like a formative assessment. There are so many different things you can do besides just a quiz or test. I mean, you can have students do thumbs up, thumbs down. You can have students do whiteboards holding up, whether it's a multiple choice answer or holding up a response that they did, where you can go and you can check their work and you can check and give specific feedback. There are so many different things you can do there. I love talking about various ways to assess students. Also, you can provide effective feedback for learning, as I just kind of elaborated on, and you can share learning and progress between students and teachers. Peer-to-peer learning is powerful, and students definitely need to take advantage of an opportunity in a classroom to have collaborative learning. Here, so those are the five topics again. So again, crafting learning intentions and success criteria, co-constructing learning intentions and success criteria with learners, creating opportunities for your students to respond, providing effective feedback on and for learning, and then sharing learning and progress between students and teachers. So they even talk here about using the GPS, or gauging the progress of your students. So this is like checking for understanding as you're going, right? So what am I learning? Why am I learning it? How will I learn or know that I learned it? So that's the success criteria. If you're ever confused about what are learning intentions, what are learning targets, what are success criteria, I've highlighted it here for you. What am I learning? That is a learning intention that every student should know. Why am I learning it? That provides both clarity and motivation for your students. And then how will I know that I learned it? That is a success criteria for your students. So this is a really good article here that I provided, and they even have a chart that you can cut and paste out or whatever, and share it at a faculty meeting or share it at a PLC, and or share it, when you're doing your own lesson planning. So they even have video clips and things like that. But we're going to continue moving forward to the next piece of our um, presentation. So we're going to now talk about the second tip for teachers in the blog, which was teaching students a growth mindset. Now, I always praise the work of Dr. Kale Dweck and what she has said about growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Many students will say, "Oh, I'm done. I just can't do it. Like I don't have enough time, or I just don't have the energy. I'm just tired of it. I just give up. I don't want to deal with this." So whenever you have situations like that, you have to understand how to teach students a growth mindset. Now, I'm going to tell you, students will kick and scream if they don't really have a relationship with you. They will provide rebuttals and they will provide kickback because they feel like, why should I do this? This is just another thing. And guess what? Principals, teachers do the same thing. If you're telling them, okay, I've got to, do this next, you know, project-based learning, or I've got to do this positive behavior support system, and they're like, I don't have time for anything else. You have to be able to convince them through feedback and through the relationship that you've built with them. So let's talk here about teaching students a growth mindset. So, in this, we talked about teaching a growth mindset and how when you do that, you're emphasizing the intelligence and math skills that they can be developed through effort and through practice. So, students are going to feel like they're grappling for answers. They'll feel like they're giving up sometimes. And you have to, as a teacher or as a leader, you have to be on the prowl to make sure that you can scaffold throughout instructional delivery to make sure that your students are where they need to be and that they're truly not going to give up, that you can somehow cultivate a resilience through that growth mindset that will also enhance their grit level so that they can be successful. Um, Researchers, they did talk in one of the articles in the blog I mentioned. There is an article and it talks about how growth mindset should be viewed as an academic mindset. Again, now this is very interesting. A growth mindset should be viewed as an academic mindset and not just the concept out there. This should be something that you should be able to have a laser beam focused on helping your students to really develop a positive language when it comes down to the learning, and that's through developing this growth mindset. Um, and so, in this research report, they talked about how, and I did give credit to them that they mentioned four parts of their mindset was that one for one, the students they would feel that their ability and their competency to grow with my effort was the way they were starting to feel about their learning. So I am growing in competency and my effort is growing. I think the key word here is growth, making sure that students feel like they're growing, or principals, if you're dealing with educators, feeling like their uh, instructional delivery is growing as a teacher. I know some teachers feel frustrated, like, is my teaching even paying off? Well, yes, it is. But how are you speaking to yourself about it? How are you viewing your overall instructional delivery? How can you trace down the growth? Is it in the test scores? Is it in the communication that you're hearing? Is it through the misconceptions that you're clearing up in the classroom with students? So be encouraged, teachers, with that. So, tip number two, again, was teaching a growth mindset uh, to students and then principals. You could teach it to teachers. Now, tip number three, whenever you're trying to, um, lead in this capacity and you're dealing with grit and you're trying to definitely develop grit in your underserved students, is to provide a supportive classroom environment. Again, to provide a supportive classroom environment. In order to create a safe and supportive classroom environment, you want to encourage collaboration and peer support. So that means that you want to have a sense of, during the metacognitive process, a sense of students not only thinking about their thinking, but sharing their thoughts with their classmates. Whether you're assigning roles, to make sure that not everybody's talking at the same time, and you've been able to, embrace some Kagan structures to make sure that there's some type of order, not to where it feels like it's so stiff, but that there's order when they're communicating. Making sure that you're having these things implemented so that students understand the flow of learning and that they're understanding each other's thoughts and that there's a place of safety and respect when students are sharing out. Now, listen, when this is done right, when you've really provided a supportive environment, students will come out of their shells of anxiety and fear of being wrong or fear of being embarrassed. That's one that we don't really think about a lot. Sometimes students, they don't want to be embarrassed, so they're not sharing out. But whenever you've provided a safe environment, those students will start coming out of their shell and they'll start sharing out. They'll start praising each other or they'll start critiquing each other in a way that is still respectful and still above board, keeping the dignity fresh for all students in the classroom. Now, tip number four, whenever you are dealing with underserved students and you're trying to cultivate their grit, you're trying to, help to develop them as independent thinkers, is you're wanting to break down complex problems to those students. So again, tip number four, you're wanting to break down complex problems to students. There's nothing more frustrating than students sitting in a math class or wherever, and you're talking about some type of theorem or you're talking about a theory or they're breaking down some type of three-step problem or they're doing an intense problem in trigonometry, whatever the topic is, and they just don't understand it. Or even something as simple as, you know, when students were trying to figure out how to factor, using, different graphs and charts and things like that. Just things that was making simple processes become more complicated. And sometimes this can happen through the language in the math textbook. So sometimes, instead of just saying it straight out, there's like all this language that students have to fight through. So sometimes as educators and as leaders, we have to break down those complex problems and just take a break, a pause and say, hey, listen, problem 6 is saying that you're supposed to do A, B, C. Okay, let me repeat. Problem 6 is expecting, it's saying that you're supposed to do A, B, C. Any questions? Okay, do you truly understand what it's asking of you? If you don't, please raise your hand so I can break it down a little bit more. And then sometimes you can model this for the students. You can maybe model a sample problem. And then what I think is very effective as well is when you're breaking down these complex problems, not only modeling it, but then giving them extra practice problems that are similar that you're creating on the go. There's something powerful as an educator when you take the learning out of the textbook, off of out of that particular uh, textbook bank of problems, and then you go to the board and then you create for your students. Whether it's something as simple as multiplying or something as simple as quadratic formula or whatever, and say you're finding the zeros and you're finding factors, and you start at the textbook, you're working on problems 1 through 5, and then you feel it. You will feel that there's like this urgency to say, I've got to take this to the next level with them, but I'm gonna have you guys now focus your attention on the board and let me go old school. I used to always say, let me go old school with you. And now let's go over like 3 problems that I'm gonna make up if you have time, right? I know time's always a concern. Let me go over a couple of problems with you to really break this down and make sure that you're understanding it, and then go back to the book. And I'm telling you, this really strengthens that learning environment for your students. And then when you even challenge them and say, okay, now I want you guys to create those problems. I want you to create a problem. And guess what? Hey, I might choose 1 or 2 of your problems for the next assessment that we have coming up. So then you might see your problem, in an assessment with your peers. That's kind of cool. So, those are some things that you want to do when you're breaking down complex problems, making sure that you're explaining instructions, walking through step by step. Don't assume that the students know everything. Sometimes there are learning blocks, learning gaps. Sometimes, they might have forgotten a couple of things. They're going to need you to come in and to ensure that they are definitely proficient and that they're not missing anything along the way. Now, tip number 5, celebrate effort and progress. I think that there needs to be a refreshed focus on celebrating all of our learners. And I say that because learners have been beaten up since, they've gone through, the pandemic, they've gone through um, the the learning at home, and just trying to adjust, to back being back in person, and then trying to adjust to assessments, and just so many different changes. And of course, they're still trying to evolve as little independent thinkers and citizens of society. And it's overwhelming. And I think that it would be so powerful if every teacher committed to praising their students, like intentionally. Um, as as cheesy as this might sound, like, when's the last time you got your roster and just said, I'm going to go around and give every single student a compliment? And it can't be like, oh, I like your shoes. No, it has to be something about them, something about their performance. I like the way you factored the problem. I always like the way you reason. I like the way you read that, as a nice, strong, confident leader. I like how you were asking questions. I like how you didn't give up when you were, tired. I saw that you were about to throw the pencil down, but then you just kept going. You kept persisting. Going around and intentionally giving every single student a compliment on their learning, their thinking, their dialect, what their dialogue, whatever it is that you've seen them kind of contribute to the learning environment is key. I think that's so powerful. And I think that if all of us could just do a more intentional job and making sure that we're praising our students, or principals praising our teachers, that are, just at the verge of giving up or just burned out, really celebrating the effort and progress so that they know that they're appreciated and that their efforts are valued. I think a key word that we're all striving to get back, especially in the next year, is value. Adding that value back to the classroom, to your students and to your teachers. So I talked about that in the blog, and some of the things that I also mentioned um, was being specific about the feedback. So I like how you factored on problem four, or you elaborated and you showed how you understood the problem in your short answer on problem six. And I thought that was phenomenal. Um, Trying to not just give the selective or the random feedback of good job, great job, that like nice work. Like let's elaborate on that feedback with our students. Um, and so with that said, let's going that's going to lead us to our next point, which is tip 6. Tip 6, I talked about providing targeted support during productive struggle. So providing targeted support during productive struggle. Productive struggle is exactly what every teacher is striving for, because that means that passion is there, and that means that those light bulbs are going to go off. Like there's nothing more exciting when you're teaching and then, oh, like, or like, I know many of you have faced this as well, where you've taught something and they've gone through and you've already moved on to like the next problem or the next part, and then like 3 minutes later you hear, oh, like, like students got it. um that's so cute. So those are some things that you're wanting to strive for, is providing targeted support during productive struggle, so that that proficiency happens, that light bulb goes off, the students have gained their confidence as independent thinkers, and they can move on. I talked here and said teachers to take the opportunities during instructional delivery and reflection to identify specific areas where your students may be struggling and provide that targeted support. In addition, they should be proactive in offering additional resources and materials and reaching out to the community for other opportunities for the students to learn and to think about their thinking, whether that's a math tutoring or parent night, game night, different things that you can do, and also communicating frequently with your parents and guardians and with your community to let them know where the students are and how students can also have ample access or opportunities to access outside of the classroom to more math or to more, instructional resources for their benefit. So definitely doing what you can. Is there boot camp? Is there an after school tutoring? Is there Saturday school? What can those students do to have that extra support? So making sure that you're doing what you can to not only provide that targeted support, but to help your students to know that there are more options out there for them. Now, the next tip is going to talk about tip number 7, fostering a sense of purpose for your students. There's nothing like being in a math class, in any class, and feeling like you're swimming in the ocean and there's nothing around you. Like you feel like it's just so much going on and there's no hope. Um, it's a horrible feeling, and many of us have felt that. And so, with that said, we've got to do our best to foster a sense of purpose for our students. So, I talked about fostering a sense of purpose for you, and I said teachers can foster a sense of purpose in the math classrooms as they help students to connect their math learning to real world applications and to their personal goals. When teachers show relevance of math by connecting it to tangible passions of their students, that's going to help answer that question that students always ask us of, when am I ever going to use this? I don't see why I need to learn this, right? So teachers should be able to explain various concepts and to convince their students on how those concepts are connected to the real world. So do you like roller coasters? Well, maybe as an engineer, you'll build roller coasters. You'll need to know quadratic functions. And then maybe you can do a field trip to Busch Gardens. You can show them how math skills, excuse me, can be valuable in various careers in everyday life, and to reassure them that they possess the skills they need to be successful in particular real world STEM careers. So birth that dream in them, or help them birth the dream of being the astronaut, being the engineer, being the tech person. You know how many students are needed in the tech force right now? With AI and all these different digital things going on. Oh my word, there's such a need for our phenomenal students. Doing what we can to help our students to have a sense of purpose, it's going to motivate them, and it will help them to persist through various challenges. So, the next tip that we talked about is the last tip for now. That's tip number 8, and that's building healthy relationships. Students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I'm going to be honest, if the student feels like the class is awkward, weird, like they are the oddball out, whether that's because of their language, their culture, their where they live, because they don't have various lived experiences. There's going to be a wall up, even if the student never says anything. And it is our job as educators to do what we can to break the wall down. So, what can we do to break those walls down? Well, for one, continuing to treat all students fair and as equitably as possible. Students will call you out if they feel like there's a respecter of person's vibe in the classroom. If you've got your teacher's pet, or you've got your click, or you've got whatever, those students will come for you. They will. They will say, "Oh, well, you always give so and so this, or you always call on so and so, and you know that, and it's like working through those things." And if you're not sure, like if you're like, "I'm not sure what I do. I'm not sure." Okay, well, one thing you can do is you can have students to take a survey, and they are not allowed to put their name on it. And in the survey, now you can do a survey monkey survey, or you can do a survey pen and paper where you ask questions, maybe 10 questions. How's my teaching? Um, are you learning in this class? What would you change? Is there something about my teaching style that you like? Is there something about my teaching style that you don't like? And be ready to eat it. Whatever it is that they give you, some students will love you and they'll praise you, and other students will keep it real, no fluff. And and I tell teachers, when you do this, you're not allowed to discipline them for whatever they say, because for one, it's anonymous and you might recognize some handwriting. Don't hold it against them. Uh-uh. You asked them for it and they gave you the truth. And so when they do this, don't take it like personal and go home and cry and be all depressed. Instead, learn from it and see, okay, this student said um, they feel like I'm totally not connected to them, or I totally don't have any type of relevance to them, or they don't like the way I hold my coffee mug as I'm teaching. Like I don't know what it is. Or the students say that I sit at my desk all the time. And, like I don't know what they're gonna say, but they're gonna say stuff. And when they do, just take it in, be thankful for the good, and learn from the ones that aren't so good. And then continue to show your students that you're trying, and then follow up with them and say, I just want to thank you guys so much for that honesty, and I just want to let you know that I'm doing my best and I will be working to be a better teacher for you. So thank you for being open and honest, and don't ever feel afraid to come to me about anything. And then just keep moving on with the lesson, and just go from there. So whenever you are able to really kind of build healthy relationships and focus on all these different, efforts that we've mentioned in this blog, you will definitely see that students will come around, students will show much improvement, and the learning experience will be so much better for all your learners. So, with that said, I'm so thankful that I was able to kind of review this with you, this blog on helping students that are underserved. And I tell you also another thing, I would say um, tip number 5, or number 9, excuse me, tip number 9 would be to never give up on your students no matter what, because sometimes it's not an easy journey. And sometimes these students are going through so much that they can't even tell the whole story. And sometimes you're just out of answers. Sometimes there are very limited resources, and you're doing everything that you can. And I just want to encourage you to continue to be amazing, but to never also give up on your students. Never give up on them. Give them another chance. Work with them on making up assignments. If they turned it in late or they don't have resources, don't make a big deal out of it. See what you can do to adjust and to help your students because they're evolving. They need you to help them. You're in there not only to teach, you're in there to train, you're in there to lead, you're in there to scaffold, you're in there to love those babies, to get them through so that they can be successful in society. So, with that said, thanks so much for joining me on the Let's Get Gritty podcast with Dr. India White. And I wish you guys a happy holiday season. And if you're wanting to connect with me again, a reminder my social media information. My Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. If you're wanting, a book on whether that's my equity counts book or my grit workbook for teachers, grit workbook for administrators, or grit workbook for students, the teachers and students are on sale right now. So you might want to go and check that out at www.india-white.com. And if you're wanting to be featured on this podcast, you can email me at india.white.123@gmail.com. And so, with that said, guys, I'm always so thankful to have you on the show. Have a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you guys next time. And until then, stay gritty.